The platinum band hit the mahogany desk with a sharp, chilling click. Next to it, I placed the thermal paper. 12 weeks, a tiny heartbeat charted in black and white. Julian stared at the ultrasound, his brow furrowed in confusion, but my father. Hector didn't look at the baby. His eyes were locked on a blue financial folder resting just beneath Julian's wrist. The blood drained from Hector's face, leaving his skin the color of old ash. He wasn't afraid of a grandchild. He was terrified of that folder. That was the second I realized my canceled wedding wasn't a heartbreak. It was a crime scene. Welcome back. If you've ever had to build a case against the very people who were supposed to protect you. Tell me your age in the comments and hit subscribe. Let's rewind 72 hours. My name is Alina Garcia. I'm 31 years old and I live in Santa Fe, New Mexico. I work as a hospital compliance auditor. My days are spent in fluorescent-lit rooms, hunting down billing anomalies, looking for the missing decimal points and the shadow accounts that administrators try to bury in the fine print. On a Tuesday morning, I stood in my bathroom and watched 2 pink lines bloom across a plastic stick. Julian was in Denver for a real estate conference. We had spent a year trying to start a family, navigating the quiet grief of negative tests month after month. Holding that positive result felt like holding a fragile piece of glass. It was the first pure thing in a life spent managing my parents' endless crises. My mother, Sylvia, invited me to lunch that afternoon. I went, intending to practice my announcement. We met at a cafe near the plaza. She wore a tailored silk blouse and her signature silver jewelry. Before the waiter even brought our drinks, she leaned across the table and studied my face. "You have dark circles, Alina," she said, stirring her iced tea. "A woman with no children has zero excuse to look so exhausted. You need to put more effort into keeping Julian interested." I ran my thumb over the cold condensation on my water glass. I swallowed the news. I gave her a practiced, polite smile. It was easier to endure her casual insults than to share my joy and watch her appraise it. She viewed Julian as a walking networking opportunity for my father, not as my partner. What I didn't know as I sat there drinking my water was that the trap was already set. They had already pulled Julian aside the night before he left for Denver. They had sat him down and fed him a calculated lie about my medical history. They told him I was genetically incapable of having children and that I was actively lying to trap him into marriage. They were orchestrating a betrayal that would sever my relationship overnight. And they did it all to keep a team of corporate wealth managers from looking too closely at my last name. I drove back to my apartment with the taste of lemon and ice water lingering on my tongue. The New Mexico sun cast long, sharp shadows across the adobe walls of my complex. Julian was supposed to be home by 5 p.m. I had spent the entire drive rehearsing the moment. I would wait until he unpacked his suitcase. I would pour 2 glasses of sparkling cider. I would hand him the small white box containing the ultrasound. I unlocked the front door and stepped onto the hardwood floor. The apartment was silent. The air conditioning hummed a low, steady drone. I walked into the kitchen and stopped. Sitting in the exact center of the white quartz island was a platinum engagement ring. Beside it rested his spare set of house keys. The metal caught the afternoon light, throwing a small, blinding glare across the counter. My chest tightened. A cold current pulled in my stomach. The ring was heavy. It was a vintage cut he had spent 6 months sourcing from a dealer in Chicago. He never took it off my finger. He never let it sit on cold stone. Before I could reach out to touch the metal, my cell phone vibrated in my purse. "Julian." I answered it, bringing the speaker to my ear. I expected to hear background noise, the sound of traffic, or an airport terminal. Instead, I heard nothing but the dead quiet of a sealed car interior. "Julian," I said, my voice shaking, "you left your ring." "I'm not coming back, Alina." His voice didn't sound angry. It sounded hollow. It carried the sterile, clipped cadence of a corporate merger falling through. He spoke to me like a bad investment. He told me he was canceling the wedding. He didn't pause to let the words settle. He just kept speaking in that flat, measured tone, citing irreconcilable omissions regarding my health. I asked him what he meant. My hand gripped the edge of the quartz counter. "Your parents sat me down last night," he said. The words dropped like stones into a well. They came to my hotel in Denver. They were in tears, Alina. They told me everything you forced them to hide. They told me you have known since you were 17 that you are permanently infertile. They told me you fabricated this entire future to trap me into a marriage. The air in the kitchen turned thin. My lungs forgot how to draw a breath. I tried to speak. I tried to tell him that I was literally carrying a child right now. I tried to tell him about the plastic stick and the tiny charted heartbeat in my purse. "Don't lie to me anymore," he said. The ice in his tone cracked, revealing a deep, raw disgust. "Your mother showed me the medical file. I've seen the surgical records. I left the ring. I'm going to your parents' house to collect my investment portfolios from Hector. Don't contact me." The line clicked dead. I stood in the silent kitchen. A baby was growing inside me, and my fiancé had just vanished into thin air based on a ghost story. What medical file? My mind snapped back to Tuesday. Sylvia had dropped by unannounced while I was at work. She claimed she wanted to bring over a box of my old college sweaters she found in the attic. Julian had been working from home that day. She must have planted it then. I walked down the hall to the guest bedroom. The cardboard box sat in the corner. I dropped to my knees and pulled the heavy wool sweaters out, tossing them onto the floor. At the very bottom, hidden beneath a layer of tissue paper, was a thick brown manila envelope. No return address, just my name written in black marker. I tore the flap open. Inside were a dozen pages of medical records. The letterhead belonged to a pediatric gynecology clinic in Albuquerque. The pages were filled with clinical notes detailing severe pelvic inflammatory disease. The surgical reports described extensive scarring and permanent ovarian damage. The final page featured a signature from a doctor I had never met alongside a typed prognosis stating natural conception was biologically impossible. The paper felt slightly rough. The edges were worn. It looked incredibly real. Panic is a physical sensation. It starts behind the eyes and floods the nervous system with static. I sat on the floor, pressing a hand to my flat stomach. I read the clinical descriptions again. My vision blurred. Was the pregnancy test a false positive? Was it a tumor, an ectopic pregnancy? The psychological violence of making a woman question the reality of her own body is profound. This was Sylvia executing her signature maneuver. Plant a seed of doubt so deep the victim destroys herself before ever looking at the perpetrator. For one terrifying hour, I sat in the dust of the guest room, my world crumbling. Then, a quiet anger began to burn. Sylvia's lies had always been elaborate but never flawless. I was a compliance auditor. My job was to find the flaws. I stood up, my legs stiff, and walked to my home office. I retrieved my secure laptop, the one I used for sensitive audits. I opened a private browser and began to search. The pediatric gynecology clinic listed on the letterhead, it had closed 5 years ago. The doctor's name. No record of anyone with that name ever practicing in New Mexico. The paper itself, it felt too old, too worn for records from a clinic that had been defunct for years. I cross-referenced the medical codes, the diagnostic terminology. They were real. But the context was wrong. This was a Frankenstein's monster of medical jargon, stitched together to create a convincing, yet utterly false, narrative. My parents hadn't just lied to Julian. They had tried to gaslight me into believing my own body was a lie. And for what? To protect Hector's financial secrets. I knew he had been in trouble before. He always had some investment opportunity that went south. Some temporary liquidity issue that required my brother Aaron to quietly bail him out. But this felt different. This felt desperate. I called Aaron. He answered on the second ring, his voice tight. "Alina, what's going on?" "Julian just called me. He sounded furious. He said you tried to defraud his family's investment firm." "Aaron, listen to me," I said, my voice steady despite the tremor in my hands. "Julian is at Mom and Dad's house right now. They fed him a pack of lies. They forged medical documents to make him believe I'm infertile to break off our engagement. And I think it's because of Dad's finances. I need you to go there. Now, don't let him sign anything. Don't let him leave until I get there." Aaron was quiet for a moment. "Infertile? Alina, that's insane. You just told me you were pregnant." I know, I said. They don't know that yet, but they will, and I need to be the one to tell them. I'm on my way. The drive to my parents' sprawling ranch house felt endless. My mind raced, piecing together fragments. The blue financial folder Julian had been holding, the look on my father's face, the sudden, desperate need to break off my engagement. It all pointed to one thing: Hector was in deep and he needed a scapegoat. And I, with my pristine credit and my auditor's eye, was the perfect target. When I arrived, the scene was already in full swing. Julian's car was parked in the driveway, next to my parents' luxury sedan. I could hear raised voices from inside. I walked through the unlocked front door, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. The dining room was a battlefield. Julian, his face pale and etched with anger, stood opposite my parents. My mother was weeping, dabbing at her eyes with a silk handkerchief. My father, Hector, was red-faced, gesticulating wildly. Julian's father, Richard, a formidable figure in the financial world, sat at the head of the table, his expression unreadable. "She's a liar, Richard," Sylvia wailed, pointing at me as I entered. "She's always been manipulative. She tried to trap Julian into marriage." "Eleanor," Julian said, his voice cold. "I thought we had something real. How could you do this?" I ignored them all. My eyes met Richard's. "Mr. Julian," I said, my voice clear and steady. "I understand there have been some serious allegations made against me. I'm here to present the facts." Hector scoffed. "Facts? She's having a breakdown. She's trying to shift the blame because her audit caught her." He signaled frantically to a waiter standing near the service doors, a subtle hand gesture designed to summon a medical transport team. The clock was ticking. I walked straight to the head table. I placed the first manila folder directly in the center of the linen cloth, resting it beside a silver basket of untouched croissants. The physical presence of the folder shifted the gravity of the room. A psychiatric transport team cannot arrest paper. I looked Richard dead in the eye. "Let's review the exhibits." The room remained suspended in a fragile glass tension. I kept my hand flat on the cover of the manila folder. Richard leaned forward. The head of Crescent Ridge Capital did not build a financial empire by coddling emotional outbursts. He built it by reading the fine print. He possessed the predatory stillness of a man who evaluated every interaction as a potential liability. He ignored Hector's frantic signaling to the wait staff. He ignored Sylvia's trembling hands. His dark eyes dropped to the folder resting on the white linen tablecloth. "Open it," Richard commanded, his voice carrying no warmth. Hector stepped around the table, his expensive leather shoes scraping against the hardwood floor. "Richard, you cannot entertain this delusion," Hector pleaded. He reached for the folder, attempting to slide it away from the center of the table. "She needs a hospital. She's trying to ruin Julian because he called off the wedding." Richard did not look at my father. He reached out and placed his palm firmly over Hector's hand, pinning it to the table. "Let her speak," Richard said. Hector swallowed hard. He slowly pulled his hand back, retreating to his chair. I flipped the folder open. The sharp rustle of thick cardstock sliced through the quiet dining room. I bypassed the emotional theater and leaned into the sterile mechanics of my profession. "Exhibit A," I announced. I slid the first document across the linen, directly in front of Richard and his chief financial officer. "This is the state registration for a corporate entity named Eleanor Garcia Consulting." I tapped the misspelled first name with my index finger. "Please note the spelling discrepancy. More importantly, note the date of incorporation, August 14th, 2009. I was an 18-year-old college freshman living in a dormitory on that date. I did not possess the capital or the legal framework to establish a commercial consulting firm." Julian stared at the registration date, his brow furrowed. He looked at me, then at Hector. "Attached to that corporate charter is a shadow employer identification number," I continued. "It functions as a corporate social security code. That specific number is currently anchoring $450. Zero of defaulted commercial debt. Debt accrued through unsecured lines of credit." Richard adjusted his posture. The chief financial officer pulled a silver pen from his breast pocket and began tracing the lines of data on the page. Sylvia slammed her hands onto the table. The silverware rattled. She forged it, Sylvia cried, her voice shrill, echoing off the high ceilings. She set it up to steal from you, Julian. She's a criminal pretending to be a victim. Sylvia's strategy was predictable: deny and project. She was relying on the forged emails Julian had shown me yesterday, the digital breadcrumbs Hector had planted to frame me. I turned the page in the folder. Exhibit B, I said. I slid a stack of network diagnostic logs toward the Crescent Ridge executives. Yesterday, Julian visited my apartment. He presented several printed emails supposedly sent from my personal account authorizing the withdrawal of funds from your firm. Julian stiffened, his tailored navy suit suddenly looking too large for his frame. You told me those emails were fake, he muttered. They are forged, Julian, I replied, maintaining my level tone. But simply calling them fake is an emotional defense. I am an auditor. I rely on data. Last night, I extracted the digital routing headers from the physical printouts you provided. I used a hospital-grade compliance software to run a reverse trace on the origin server. I pointed to the highlighted string of numbers on the diagnostic log. Those emails did not originate from my apartment network. The IP address listed on that report belongs to the local area network router sitting in Hector's home office. The messages framing me for corporate embezzlement were drafted, sent, and deleted from a desktop computer located in the exact same room where he keeps his financial ledgers. The color drained from Julian's face. He looked at the IP address, then slowly turned his head to look at Hector. The narrative he had swallowed. The tragic story of an infertile, manipulative fiancé was fracturing into 1,000 jagged pieces. Hector began to sweat. A visible sheen coated his forehead. "Richard," he stammered, his voice losing its polished resonance. "She hacked my network. She's a compliance officer. She knows how to manipulate data." "Exhibit C," I said, ignoring Hector's desperate outburst. I slid the final document across the table. It was the forged medical file Sylvia had planted in my guest room. This document was presented to Julian as proof of my infertility. It purports to be from a pediatric gynecology clinic in Albuquerque, a clinic that closed 5 years ago. The doctor listed on the report has no record of ever practicing in New Mexico, and the paper itself, Mr. Julian, is a cheap imitation designed to look aged. I paused, letting the weight of the revelation settle. My parents created this elaborate fiction to break up my engagement and to frame me for their financial crimes. They needed a scapegoat for the $450. Zero in defaulted debt tied to Aliner Garcia Consulting, a company they created in my name when I was 18, without my knowledge or consent. Julian stared at the medical file, then at me. His eyes, once filled with disgust, now held a dawning horror. You're not infertile?" he whispered. "No, Julian," I said, my voice soft but firm. "I'm not. In fact, I reached into my purse and pulled out the small white box containing the ultrasound. I placed it on the table next to the forged medical records. I'm pregnant, 12 weeks. The silence in the room was deafening. Julian's gaze dropped to the ultrasound, then back to me, his face crumpled. Richard, ever the pragmatist, picked up the blue financial folder that had been the catalyst for this entire charade. He opened it, revealing a series of meticulously documented transactions, all pointing back to Hector's fraudulent activities. The fallout was swift and brutal. Richard Julian, a man who valued integrity above all else, ensured that Hector's financial empire crumbled. My father faced federal wire fraud charges. Sylvia, implicated in the conspiracy, also faced legal consequences. Julian, devastated by the depth of his parents' deception and his own misguided trust, apologized profusely. He begged for forgiveness, for a chance to make things right. I told him I needed time, a lot of time. My brother, Aaron, finally understood the full extent of our parents' manipulation. He cut ties with them, choosing to protect his own future and his family from their toxic influence. The Aliner Garcia Consulting debt was eventually cleared. A bitter victory that came at a steep personal cost. The process of auditing your own bloodline is never easy, but it is the only way to ensure the rot does not spread to the roots of the next generation. I had to mourn the family I deserved while simultaneously fighting the family I was actually given. But the reward for that excruciating labor was a clean slate. When I look at the framed 12-week ultrasound picture hanging above Clara's crib, I don't see the catalyst for a criminal indictment. I see the exact moment the inheritance of deceit was permanently severed. I see a promise kept. Raising Clara has taught me that emotional awareness is the most critical asset you can pass down to the next generation. It means recognizing your child's fears and joys as valid, separate entities from your own desires. It means resisting the urge to manipulate their reality to serve your comfort. If Clara ever makes a devastating mistake, I will not teach her to construct a shadow corporation or forge a digital paper trail to hide from the consequences. I will teach her to sit in the uncomfortable light of accountability. Accountability is the only soil where genuine resilience grows. We live in a society that often rewards the loudest voice in the room, the slickest presentation, the most aggressive maneuver. But long-term guidance requires teaching a child the value of the fine print. It requires showing them that character is defined by what you do when the security cameras are turned off and the bank accounts are frozen. I want Clara to understand that her worth is inherent. It is not tied to a corporate merger, a country club membership, or the approval of people who view love as a transactional currency. Honesty within a family is not merely the absence of lies. It is the active daily practice of transparency. It means allowing your children to see your flaws without burdening them with the responsibility of fixing them. Hector and Sylvia could not bear the shame of their own financial failures. So, they forced their son and their daughter to carry the debt. They violated the most sacred rule of the family structure. Parents are meant to shield their children from the fire, not use them as kindling to keep themselves warm. As I lay Clara down in her crib and pull the soft blanket over her shoulders, I watch the moonlight filter through the blinds, casting long, shifting shadows across the floorboards. The apartment is safe, the locks are secure. And the future is an open, unwritten page. Yet the past never truly vanishes. It simply changes its shape. We all inherit a ledger from the people who raised us, filled with debts we did not accrue and assets we must carefully appraise. The question is not whether you were handed a corrupted balance sheet. The question is what you will choose to write on the next blank line, when you look into the mirror of your own life. Recognizing the quiet choices you make when no one else is watching, ask yourself, are you building a foundation that will hold firm in the storm, or are you just arranging the shadows to look like a home? If you are navigating the heavy work of untangling your own worth from a toxic environment, if you are learning how to set the quiet boundaries that protect your peace, you are not alone. There is a community of people learning how to read the ledger and reclaim their narrative. Drop a comment below to share the lessons you are passing down to the next generation. And subscribe. Together, we can continue to explore the intricate, sometimes painful dynamics of family justice and the power of the undeniable truth.